All right, now we're live. Hi, Austin. How you doing, man?
Hey, Brad, I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great, and I want to welcome everybody to the Love What You Do show, the show that's all about helping you discover your purpose, even when you don't think you're good enough to do it. And Austin Belcak is the founder of Cultivated Culture, and you have created an amazing website and community of people that have landed jobs with uh, out a lot of the like applying online effort. And that's kind of your go-to, that's kind of your tagline of like, hey, I this system sucks of just applying, going in the black hole and not getting any results and feeling rejected or not hearing anything at all. And you've developed a system and a business around it too that helps people get jobs that they really care about, they really love, and make human connections at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, welcome to the show, and I'd love for you to share, who you are more, some of the backstory of how all this got started, because you just weren't birthed into this; it was created, and you are the creator of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for having me, Brad. I know you and I have been connected for a while, and we've been going back and forth on a lot of stuff. So it's great to finally do something like this, and
Yeah.
congrats on the show. But yeah, so for me, I mean, I kind of do two things now. From 9 to 5, I still work at Microsoft full time. Been doing that for 5 years, and then outside of that, I run Cultivated Culture, like you mentioned. So I've been doing that for 4 years, and essentially the goal of Cultivated Culture is to teach people how to be more effective job seekers. And really what that comes down to is avoiding the black hole of applying online and figuring out ways to get in the door by building relationships and landing referrals, and then finding creative ways to showcase your value. So that whole concept stemmed from my personal journey, going from a recent grad with a 2.58 GPA and a biology degree to landing interviews and offers at Google, Microsoft, and Twitter. So that whole time, that journey was a rough one, and there was a lot of doubt, there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of rejection and failure, and honestly depression at some points. But over time, and through a lot of experimentation and trial and error, I sort of figured out a way to make this happen, to circumvent that traditional application process, and to get in the door with these companies that I really wanted to work for, despite the fact that I didn't have that traditional background, that marketing degree, or that formal experience. And so that was the result of a whole lot of testing. And through that testing, I developed this system. And that system is essentially, what I share on Cultivated Culture. So when I got my job at Microsoft, I had a ton of people coming to me and saying, hey, especially from college, they're like, hey, weren't you the guy with the bad grades? How did you end up with this job? And after enough people asked, I decided to write it up in a blog post. I did some promotion. It got a really, really good response. A lot of people were saying, thank you for this. I didn't think there was another way, and this has been so frustrating. And so that really, those stories and that feedback really pushed me to keep going with it. And that was 4 years ago. So the rest is history. Now we have, I think we're up to about 350,000 people in the Cultivated Culture audience. We've helped, thousands of people get jobs at world's best companies, again, without applying online, and, despite having a non-traditional background. And it's just been a lot of fun to watch it grow and see people get results with what I consider to be, a more modern day job search strategy.
Yeah. So what kind of like someone who's frustrated and they're tired and they're giving their computer the middle finger, they're about ready to throw it on the floor, and like, I am qualified for this job. I know I am. And I didn't get any response. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm, a loser. And why can't I get I just want an email to say, please look at me, what's what can you tell them, or what can you demonstrate and share with them that can give them hope?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing there's a couple of things to think about there. But what it really comes down to is that just because everybody's doing something doesn't mean that it's the right way to do something, and doesn't mean that it's the best way to do something. And so there's a great Twain quote that I have above my desk when I'm at my desk, and it says, "If you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect." And that's not to say that if you're on the side of the majority, you're doing something wrong and you should always be a rebel and counterculture and all this stuff. It's just saying, if everybody else is doing something and you're doing it too, but you're not getting the results that you'd hope for, or you're not getting the outcomes that you'd want, take a step back and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing it because everybody else is doing it? Or am I doing it because, this is something that I truly believe in? And if it's the former, if you're just doing it because that's what everybody tells you, but you're not getting the results you want, maybe it's time to try something new. And the great part about, taking the road less traveled is that there isn't as much traffic, right? And that road tends to be, unpaved, a little bit rocky, or maybe it's got some hills and some valleys and some ups and downs and twists and turns. But if that's the path that, works for you, or at least is a different path that you can explore, I think it's worth going down. And what you tend to see is that, if something is easy for you to do or for I to do, it's just as easy for everybody else. So I've been reshooting my course from scratch, and I was doing this video on cover letters yesterday. And the big thing that I was saying was I led with that. If it's easy for you to find or do, it's easy for everybody else. And with cover letters, we see people go they go to Google and they type in cover letter template, and they look at the first couple of results and they pick one and they use that. But that took you 30 seconds to find, a minute to find. It also took everybody else 30 seconds or a minute to find, which means everybody else is going to have that same template. And so with the things that are easy, there tend to be a lot of competition. And that just makes it so much harder to stand out, especially when the process is broken. So I think what we tend to do is, and this is just part of our natural psychology, right? We see, so social proof is a big part of our psychology, and our whole system is wired to make things easy to do and shortcut things, right? And so if we see everybody doing something, we say, oh, that must be the way to do it, and our brain just goes into this automatic fixed action pattern, they call it. And we do the same thing because we assume that, in most cases, if everybody's doing something, like if I'm eating with a fork and I'm using the tongue end, or I see other people doing that, I just assume that that's an easy way to eat. Whereas, if I tried to do it a different way with the other end of the fork, I'm not going to be getting much food. So that's just how our natural psychology works. We see other people doing something. If enough people do it, we assume that that's the best way to do it, because 90% of the time that works for us, in our daily lives. But with something like this, that's not necessarily the case. And so once we're able to kind of take a beat and pause and reflect and say, why am I doing this? Is it because everybody else is doing it, or is it because it's really something that's effective and meaningful to me? If you can answer that question and you realize you are doing it because other people are doing it, now you can sort of step out of that cage, or kind of break those shackles, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And then you can say, okay, how can I approach this a different way? And when we think about the job search, it really comes down to one thing. Companies want to hire the candidate that they believe will bring the most value to the role. That's it at the end of the day. And so if we think about the materials that we use to apply for these jobs, a resume or a cover letter or whatever it is, are those really the best way to show value? No, probably not really. And we don't use them anywhere else, right? Like if I'm going to sell something to somebody, I'm going to pitch them using, regular language, or I'm going to put a pitch deck together. I'm not going to, put all these like weird fluffy buzzwords in there and give them an 8.5 by 11 black and white sheet of paper. And so
please buy me.
Sorry.
Please buy me.
Exactly. And to your point that you just made with that statement, a lot of these materials are me focused, right? It's here's what I've done. It's, here's what I want. Here's, what I bring to the table. And there isn't a lot of, hey, Brad, you're hiring, and I know this is what's important to you. And here's how what I've done matters to you. Here's why I'm the best person for you. It's all, here's what I've done. Here's who I am. Here's what I want. It's a lot of me. And you can't really blame job seekers for that, simply because that's the way the process is structured. So a resume, we're kind of told to, sales 101 is to make the pitch about the other person. And a resume forces you to do the complete opposite about that. Everything is about you. And it's also about your past. If you're trying to change careers, if you're trying to do something new, you don't really have the freedom to express that in a resume because you're forced to put your last job and your last few jobs on there. And there's no space on a resume that's accepted where you can say, hi, this is what I've done in the past, but I'm no longer interested in that for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I'm now interested in this. And here's why I think some of these skills are transferable or whatever it is. You're sort of just stuck saying, here's what I've done, and I can't tell you anything else about it. And that's not that's not the best way to sell ourselves. That's not the best way to convey our story. So for me, that realization came pretty early on. Well, not pretty early on now in context. It felt like, an eternity between when I started and when I got there. But once that light bulb went off, I sort of realized, well, why don't I just find a way to communicate my value in the way that would make the most sense to me? If I was a hiring manager, I would want a job seeker to come to me and say, hey, you have this role. I've done some research. I know what you care about. Here is what I bring to the table, and here's how it's going to be impactful for you. And so that's exactly what I did. I started, instead of applying online, I just started going and finding people who could potentially be the hiring manager. And I started reaching out to them. I started building relationships with them. And that led to referrals into these companies. And then instead of, again, relying on a resume or a cover letter, in my interviews, I would put together something that I call a value validation project, which is essentially, a little bit of a pitch deck. In my case, in sales and marketing, that was the best medium. But it was a little bit of a pitch deck that said, hey, I've done this research. Here are some opportunities, challenges, problems that I know exist that are backed by actual evidence, customer feedback, reviews online, things like that. And then here's some ideas for how to solve them, or here's a suggestion for your initiative or whatever it is. And then, oh, by the way, here's why I'm qualified to give this advice. And that just played so much better than anything else I did, because that's what people are used to getting in the workplace. That's what people are used to seeing. And so, to go back to your question, that was, a long way to answer it. But I think really what it comes down to is, you don't have to be, just because everybody else is doing something, you don't have to be boxed into that same situation, that same process. The world is your oyster, and the best people in business and life are the ones who are constantly experimenting, constantly testing, constantly challenging the status quo to make sure that they're doing the best thing. And sometimes the best thing is the status quo, and that's fine. But at least they can say, hey, I've tested other stuff, and I know for a fact that the status quo is the best thing to do in this case. They're not just saying, hey, I'm going to do the status quo because, I see, John, Mary, and Joe doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's what I heard throughout all of that is being of service to the person or the organization that you're speaking to, because they're hiring you because they're in service of someone else. Mm-hmm. The customers that that are paying them to do whatever that is, and they're concerned that they need to do a good job. And when you show up to an interview in a completely different presence, that's not me, and it's how can I help you? That's for most people that I've experienced, it's like, that's kind of like a fresh of breath air. Like, this guy might be helpful. This woman might be really helpful. They don't have the background, but they sure seem pretty awesome.
Exactly.
The question kind of came up while you're sharing this. I didn't know where I was going to lead with this, but do you have a favorite example of a client that you've worked with where they followed the strategy that you have, and it's that was amazing? That what happened was awesome. Yours is awesome. But
I mean, there's so many examples. I think my personal favorite is this person's now become a great friend of both me and my wife. We've kind of kept in touch with her, but she started out as a high school Spanish teacher. Mm-hmm. And that was her. She'd been doing that for a couple of years, and she decided, that had taught her a lot, but it was time for the next thing. And that next thing for her was marketing. She was really excited to get into marketing. So we started working together, and she was actually one of the first people that I had ever coached. And so we started working together, and she showed up and she said, I'm a high school Spanish teacher and I want to be in marketing. How do I do that? And so we worked together, and she followed the process to a T. So essentially my process in a bit of a nutshell is, go out and pick 10 to 15 target companies, then go find 10 to 15 contacts at each of those companies. So you're looking at, in the ballpark of 100 to 150 contacts. Start reaching out to them. To your point, Brad, make the outreach about the other person, lead with value, have that sort of service mindset, and work to get some conversations with those people, and then leverage those conversations in tandem with, a lot of research on your side to understand what the company's biggest challenges are, what initiatives they're driving over the next 6 to 12 months, what their goals are, what their culture looks like, what their vision is, all of these things. You want to understand the company about as well as you possibly could without being a full-time employee there. And then when you show up to these conversations, you want to use the conversation to flesh that out and sort of ask some of the deeper questions, get that deeper info. And through the conversations, you build relationships. But then you come back and you use that information to create a value validation project. And so with her, she executed it to a T. She was reaching out to people. She was having conversations. She was putting together value validation projects. But one of the kickers was that, things were, we were getting like right to the end, sports analogy, we were at like the goal line and we wouldn't get across. So, we would be in the final round, we'd get a referral. She'd get through the first person. The next person would say, you may not have enough experience, but we kind of worked our way through that. She'd get to the final round, and then like something would happen and they'd be like, we went with somebody else, or we shut down the role, or whatever it was. And that happened to us like 3 times. And one of the biggest things with the job search, and really anything in life, starting a business, climbing the ladder, being happy, a lot of it is just kind of being persistent through the challenges that come your way. And so, a lot of people that I see, that the difference between the people who see success with this process and the people who don't are the ones who are kind of willing to push through and keep going. So I see a lot of people, they comment on my posts on LinkedIn, or they send me an email and they're like, hey, I tried, your value validation project once and the company said no. And they're like, I don't know what to do. And it's like, well, that's one time. So let's try it again and see what happens. But the people who sort of innately have that motivation, they tend to do really well. And so she kept showing up. But the reason that this is one of my favorite stories, there's 2 reasons. So one, she ended up eventually getting a job with an agency that manages LinkedIn's entire SEO, their search engine optimization. So she went from a high school Spanish teacher to now like working on LinkedIn's, search engine optimization, how they show up on Google. It's a really, really big deal. And she's absolutely loving it. But the second reason is she actually went back to all the companies that said no to her and said, hey, I got this job working on LinkedIn's SEO. Are you still looking for help with your marketing? And if so, I can consult for you. And she ended up booking a couple of clients. So she turned those rejections into clients who are now paying her on top of her full-time job. And it's just like the coolest story ever, because she, like, the odds were stacked against her. So many people in that position would have never dreamed that they could make it into marketing, and, let alone be working on, one of the world's, like most amazing startups in my opinion. And then, have this side hustle all happen. It took her about 8 months to get into LinkedIn, and then another couple of months to spin up those side gigs. But, in the course of a year, like, your entire life and its trajectory can absolutely change. And the whole reason was because, we could have worked together. I could have shared all the stuff with her. The whole reason she was able to do it is because she believed in herself. And she was also willing to take a step back and say, everybody else is doing this thing that's not working. I want to do something different.
Yeah. It's one, awesome. Big kudos to you. Kudos to her for, believing in herself. And, as a coach myself, we don't do the work. You're not doing the work for them, right? You can't, like I had an analogy. One of my coaches that I've had along the ways with, Brad, I can't run the ball for you. Yeah. I will tell you when you're dropping it and you need to pick it up. But you're going to run the ball. Right.
Yep.
And it's really cool. It's really amazing when someone comes to you, a lot of times in a mindset of like almost defeat, or even like that depression. And you can say one sentence or one thing and it like shifts something, and then they can go this direction. And it's just really incredible. It's really awesome. Mm-hmm. So people can go to your website, they can check out Cultivated Culture. You've got a lot. You've got more resources than what I imagined. I was just double checking the site this morning. You've been hard at work on a resume builder, a bullet builder. Like, you've got a ton of things on there. What's the most important thing for someone who's just getting started and wrapping their mind around this new mindset of like, maybe I shouldn't be in the black hole. Maybe I shouldn't be in this like vortex that's not getting me any results, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you can do is just get out there and find people who already have what you want, who've already walked the path that you're about to, set foot on. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, reaching out to strangers and building relationships is a big part of the process. And that can be a very, very daunting task. So if you start reaching out to some of these people who already have what you want with the goal of just learning more about them and what they did, that takes a little bit of the pressure off, because a lot of people that I work with, they show up and they're like reaching out to these people with the sole goal of like getting the job. And it's really hard to build a relationship when the only thing you care about is something that's self-serving. And, it's this whole idea of like, I'm only talking to this person because I need a job. So I think that if you take a step back from that and say, okay, before I get started, I want to make sure that I'm on the right path. I want to avoid any potential mistakes that I can possibly avoid. I want to make sure to capitalize on any strategies that work really well. And who's going to be able to tell me, that stuff in detail? Well, it's going to be people who have done it themselves. And so that was a big realization for me during my job search. When I got started, I took advice from people we always go to, right? Our family, our friends, career counselors at my university, the internet. And everybody was kind of saying the same thing, tweak your resume, apply online, rinse and repeat. And what I realized was that, none of these people had really done what I wanted to do. None of them had made a complete career transition. None of them had worked at a Microsoft or a Google or a Facebook or whatever. And so I realized that if I wanted to understand, where I was going wrong and what to do next, I needed to go find people who had actually done that themselves. And so I made a list of my dream job criteria. I said, I want to be working in New York or San Fran or LA. I want to be working for a major tech company, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, et cetera. I want to be making, X dollars a year. And I want to do this before I'm 25 years old, because I was 21 at the time. And I just used LinkedIn to go find those people. And I reached out to them. And a lot of them worked at super high caliber companies, but I didn't reach out and say, hey, I'm trying to make this career change. Can you refer me in? Blah, blah, blah. I sent them an email and said, hey, I saw that you made a career change. And, I imagine that was not easy to do. And that's really impressive. So I'd love to learn more about your journey and how you did that and some of the obstacles you faced. Would you have a couple minutes to talk about that? And people were so receptive to that message because, it was about them, and it sort of built them up saying, hey, you're impressive. What you've done, really stood out to me. And so I got a lot of responses. I ended up talking to about 20, 25 people, and they completely blew the doors off of the traditional process, and kind of that was the foundation for the system that I use now. But that only came out of talking to people who had what I wanted. So this is true for anything in life. If you want to start a business and you're still working full time, go find people who have businesses who are working full time. If you're an accountant and you want to be a graphic designer, go see if you can find people who got into graphic design from a non-traditional background. It doesn't necessarily have to be accounting, but anybody who came from a different background and got in the door will be able to help. And so finding those people who have already walked the path and seen success, that same path that you're setting foot on, that's really where the magic happens. And that's probably the best first step that you can take, because it gets you comfortable with cold outreach. Your chances of hearing back are a little bit higher in these instances, but it's also super motivating, because you start talking to these people who have done it, and it makes you realize like it can be done. And just having that knowledge, that hope at the very beginning it can be enough to kind of propel you through the hard parts that will come, because it's never easy. There are always obstacles. There are always frustrating times. There's always rejection. But knowing that other people have done it and you have a playbook is such a powerful thing when you're getting started.
Yeah, it's like a shining light in a big room of darkness, and you see it and you're like, oh, maybe they figured it out, and hopefully they grab your hand and can kind of guide you along the way to it. and it's really powerful. And it's also the other side of it's really powerful too, to feel sucked into that space where nothing's happening. And then you get caught up in your ego, you get caught up in all the negative beliefs that you have. And it's like, it's just not working. It's just not working. It's just not working, you know? And it's not until someone else can shine that light and be like, what? Let's not do it this way. Here's a different way. And it's a little different, but it's going to be all right.
Exactly.
Give me your hand. I'll help you along the way.
Take the lead.
Yeah. So how can people get connected with you? Is it straight through cultivatedculture.com? Is there other resources? You know, where should people go to, you know, kind of find and discover, you know, where they need to go next?
Sure. So the two best places are the website, cultivatedculture.com. To your point, you know, we have a lot of free resources and tools. Every single thing on the site is free. So, you know, the resume tools kind of all work in tandem. And then there's a whole guide. If you go to the blog, it's pinned right at the top. It's called How to Get a Job Anywhere with No Connections. And that's sort of the entire walkthrough of my job search philosophy and system, step-by-step breakdown, the whole deal. So that's a great place to start. And then LinkedIn, you know, as you know, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I post every day. I try to, you know, reply to everybody's comments and messages as best I can. And that's a really, really good place to kind of get in touch and follow along as well.
Okay, cool. And I know you've had some programs in the past too that people can, get into, and it's like you still have that, right? Like a step-by-step.
Yeah, for sure. So what we're running. So like I mentioned, I'm reshooting the entire course this summer. So we have a little bit of a pause on that, but it's going to be released again in the fall. But to me, the most important thing is you know, showing people that this stuff kind of works on its own. And, you know, I'd rather have you test out some of the free stuff rather than being like, you know, hey, here's the course, take it without, you know, just on one podcast. So a lot of the free materials is the best place to start right now, I'd say. And then if people are interested, there's going to be, I think we're adding in the ballpark of 10 to 15 extra hours of content to the course. So it should be pretty awesome. And that's coming out in the fall.
Should be. Sounds like it already is.
I think it's awesome, but I'm biased.
Yeah, everything I've seen you put out, there's just a ton of like detail and a ton of like the little small things. So I appreciate that, and those little things make a big difference for a lot of people that obviously you already know all of this. I just want to remind you of it. I'm just here to remind you how awesome you are.
So much, man.
All right, well, everybody, check out Austin's, website, Cultivated Culture, or, check him out, connect with him on LinkedIn, and there's just, follow him there. You're always putting out great articles, and you're doing a lot of lives and stuff like that as well, which I want to go live on LinkedIn too. I need a connection there. So if you got any hints or suggestions there, I put in my application. I haven't heard anything back yet.
Mine got approved like 4 months after I put it in. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, it was, and I didn't even know. They sent me a rejection letter, and then they enabled it like a couple months later. So I'm not sure what the rhyme or reason is. And I know people who have had it's a funky process. So I got my fingers crossed for you. If I come across somebody who has the magic lever, I will absolutely let you know.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, I don't know how I got in.
Yeah, I mean, the people on StreamYard, they messaged me back their customer service and is like, "Hey, we put in a good word for you." I'm like, "Okay, great."
Nice.
Goes, just take some time. I'm like, "Okay, well, here we go." Just want to help you.
Crossed.
So cool, man. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and end the broadcast. We'll chat here in a little bit, or Sounds right good. After that. But I appreciate who you are, and thanks everybody for listening.